Ma'am, who is this child?
My daughter. We're eating breakfast. What's going on?
What's her name? Where does she live?
With me. If you need information, talk to me.
Sweetheart, what's your mom's name?
Officer, please don't interview her like that. Here's my ID.
Stand up for me. Step into the aisle.
I'm not leaving my child alone.
Racial profiling crashed into a child's birthday breakfast when a patrol officer walked into Maple Street Bakery and Diner, ignored every normal sign of a family outing, and treated a black mother sitting with her white 5-year-old like an active kidnapping. What should have been a quick welfare check turned into a full escalation. Radio codes, non-compliance language, and a public arrest attempt built on nothing but a stranger's discomfort. And because the whole place started recording, this didn't stay a messy diner moment. It turned into a civil rights investigation, a termination, and a $2 million settlement that forced the city to answer a question they didn't want on camera. Why did "it doesn't look right" automatically mean criminal when the mom was black? All right, real quick, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you watch these stories because you're tired of people getting bullied by uniforms and assumptions, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now rewind it, because the part that makes this infuriating is how normal it started. Danielle Harper showed up at Maple Street the same way she did almost every Saturday. Same time window, same booth near the corner where Lily could see the pastry case and the old spinning dessert stand. Danielle liked routines. Lily loved them. Lily was turning 5, and she had the kind of birthday excitement that made her talk with her hands and bounce in her seat like she had springs under her. Danielle wasn't trying to be seen. No big party, no loud group. Just breakfast, candles on pancakes, and that little family tradition they'd built after the adoption finalized. Maple Street knew them, not in a formal way, in a human way. The hostess recognized Lily's face. A server had already learned what Lily usually ordered. People nodded at Danielle because regulars nod at regulars. It was that kind of place. That's why the call came off so ugly when it happened. Somebody in the diner, another customer, not staff, looked over and decided the scene didn't look right. That was the whole complaint. No report of a struggle, no crying child, no one running. Just a black woman sitting with a white child eating breakfast. Like that was suspicious enough to involve a badge. Dispatch sent it as a vague child welfare concern. No hard facts, no allegation with details. Just a check it out. And Officer Evan Kessler took that vague call and walked in like he'd been handed a case that needed a hero. He didn't scan the room like a neutral responder. He didn't talk to the hostess first. He didn't ask staff, the people who actually knew the diner's regulars. He locked onto that booth and went straight there. Danielle noticed the shift immediately. Not because she scared easy, because she understood posture. She understood the way some officers moved when they already decided what they were looking at. Lily noticed too, not with words, but with that kid instinct that tells them when the room changes. Kessler stopped at the edge of the booth and positioned himself like a barrier, like he was there to control, not to clarify. He focused on Lily first, then Danielle, then Lily again. He started asking questions in a way that didn't treat Danielle like a parent. He treated her like a problem he expected to solve by pressure. Danielle stayed calm. She didn't perform panic. She didn't raise her voice. She did what a responsible adult does when a uniform walks up to their table with that kind of energy. She anchored the moment. She kept Lily close. She answered in a steady tone. She offered identification right away because she knew how quickly a simple check could turn into something else if the officer wanted it to. And Lily, 5 years old, still small enough to swing her legs under the table, answered like a kid who had nothing to hide. Lily acted like this was weird, but not scary yet. She had no reason to be scared yet. The diner around them started paying attention. You know how it goes. One table notices, then another. Forks slow down. A server pauses a little too long near the booth. People sense when something is about to go sideways. And Kessler, he didn't de-escalate. He leaned in. He started pushing the moment toward compliance, toward control. toward that familiar script where the person being questioned has to prove their innocence fast enough, politely enough, and perfectly enough to satisfy an officer's vibe check. That's where this story actually began. Because the next thing Kessler did, right there in front of Lily's birthday breakfast, told everyone watching that he wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for a reason. Kessler didn't start with neutral questions. He started with control. He kept his body between Danielle and the aisle. He aimed his attention at Lily, like Danielle wasn't the obvious adult in charge. He asked for names, asked where Lily lived, asked who brought her here. Not in a casual way, in a testing way, like he wanted inconsistency. Danielle answered cleanly, and she didn't ramble. She didn't argue. She kept it simple, like anyone who's dealt with authority knows to do when the vibe turns. She handed over her ID without being asked twice. She explained Lily was her adopted daughter. She offered the adoption documents immediately because she carried copies for stuff like school paperwork and travel. Normal parent prep. Lily backed her up without hesitation. Kid-level confidence. No fear, no confusion. She described Danielle as her mom, the same way a child says the sky is blue. It was casual. It was real. That should have ended it. Kessler didn't accept it. He looked at the ID, looked at Danielle, then looked back at Lily like the kid's calm didn't matter. He asked Lily more questions. He asked them in a way that put pressure on her to perform the right answers. Danielle stayed steady and kept redirecting the focus back to her, because that's what any good parent does when a stranger with a badge starts interviewing a 5-year-old at a breakfast table. Kessler framed that as a problem. He said Danielle was interfering. He implied she was coaching. He used that tone officers use when they want the room to hear that the person is being difficult. He started building his story out loud. Danielle didn't match his energy. She didn't give him a scene. She kept her voice controlled and repeated the basics. She was Lily's mother. Lily was safe. Documents were right there, and there was no emergency. That's when Kessler made a choice that can't be walked back. He keyed his radio and called in a child abduction code. In a diner, with Lily sitting there. Now everybody's heads turned. Staff stopped pretending not to stare. Customers started pulling out phones for real. You could feel the room switch from curious to alarmed. That's what that radio call does. It paints a target. It turns a family into a spectacle. The server who knew them stepped in first. Not aggressive, just firm. She told Kessler this was a regular mother-daughter pair. Every Saturday. Same booth, same routine. The hostess backed it up. A couple of customers did too. People who had seen them enough times to recognize them, even if they didn't know their last names. Kessler didn't care. He acted like the whole diner was lying. Or clueless, or both. He dismissed the witnesses the way insecure authority does. If the crowd won't confirm his suspicion, the crowd becomes part of the problem. A second officer arrived. Different energy. Quieter. He didn't posture. He looked at Lily, looked at Danielle, looked at the situation like a human being trying to understand what's actually happening. Danielle handed him the adoption paperwork. He reviewed it, actually read it. He checked names, dates, signatures. He asked a couple short, clarifying questions that made sense. Then his body language changed. You could tell he understood. This was real. This was legitimate. This was a family having breakfast. He tried to convey that to Kessler. Kessler still didn't back down. Because by then, this wasn't about Lily's safety, not really. This was about Kessler committing to his original assumption and refusing to take the exit ramp. He'd already dropped the abduction code. He'd already made Danielle the suspect in front of a room full of people. If he admitted he was wrong, he'd be exposed in real time. So he doubled down. He started giving Danielle orders that didn't fit the situation. Stand up, step away, move here, put your hands where I can see them. He treated mother sitting in a booth like dangerous unknown subject. Danielle refused to play along with humiliation. She didn't refuse cooperation. She refused nonsense. Big difference. She kept offering the same reasonable solution. Verify the documents. Confirm identity. Talk to staff. End it. Handle it like a professional. Kessler twisted that into failure to comply. And the second officer? He didn't want to fight his partner in the middle of a crowded diner. He hovered in that uncomfortable space. Officers sometimes get stuck in, knowing the escalation is wrong, but not stepping hard enough to stop it. Phones kept recording. You could see it happening from every angle. Customers weren't whispering anymore. They were narrating with their cameras. Staff looked stressed because they knew what this was turning into. Lily started picking up on the danger. Her face changed. Less birthday. More confusion. She clutched the edge of the booth and watched Danielle the way kids do when they're checking if the adult is still in control of the world. Danielle stayed calm anyway. That was the scary part. Calm doesn't mean safe. Calm just means she knew exactly what he was doing. And Kessler, he pushed it to the edge on purpose. He told Danielle she was obstructing. He said she was interfering with an investigation. He treated her steady tone like defiance. He set up the last step, the one that lets an officer turn a bad stop into an arrest without admitting the original reason was garbage. He reached for his cuffs, and Lily saw it. Kessler didn't pause to reassess. He went straight to force. He told Danielle she needed to stand up and step away from the booth. He framed it like a lawful order tied to a kidnapping investigation, even though he still had zero facts beyond a stranger's vibe. Danielle stayed seated for a second because Lily sat right next to her, and she wasn't about to leave her kid alone at a table while an officer hovered. That's when Kessler flipped the language again. He said Danielle was obstructing. He said she refused to comply. He said it loud enough for the room to hear it, because he wanted the crowd to accept his version before anyone could challenge it. Danielle didn't yell back. She didn't panic. She repeated the same points, steady and clear. Lily was safe. Lily already confirmed she was her mother. Her ID matched, and the adoption documents were available and already reviewed by another officer. She told him there was no probable cause to treat this like a kidnapping. Kessler didn't respond to any of that. He responded to the fact that Danielle wasn't shrinking. He reached in, grabbed Danielle's arm, and ordered her out of the booth. Not gently, not with any concern for the kid inches away. He pulled her up and backed her into the aisle where everyone could see. This is where a lot of officers would have stopped. They would have taken the off-ramp, saved face, called it a misunderstanding, and walked out. Kessler chose humiliation. He turned Danielle toward him and went for the cuffs. He announced the arrest as obstruction and failure to comply. He made it sound procedural, like it was inevitable, like Danielle caused it by not obeying his script. And Lily's face changed fast. She didn't understand probable cause or obstruction. She understood her mom getting grabbed. She understood metal cuffs. She understood the officer voice. Her birthday breakfast turned into fear in about 3 seconds. She started crying and calling for Danielle. She tried to stand up like she wanted to follow, then froze because she didn't know if she was allowed. Kids lock up like that. They want to move, but they don't know what the rules are anymore. Danielle tried to keep her voice calm for Lily, even while Kessler pulled her hands behind her back. That's the part people in the diner remembered later. Danielle didn't perform rage. She stayed controlled for her child. Customers stood up. Not all at once, but enough that the room shifted. A man near the counter told Kessler he was wrong. A woman closer to the booth told him the paperwork had already been shown. Staff tried to move towards Lily, because Lily was shaking and crying, and nobody wanted a 5-year-old sitting alone while her mom got cuffed 10 feet away. Kessler pushed the crowd back verbally. He treated every witness like a threat to his authority. He made it about scene control. That's how escalation survives in public. You label everyone else the problem. Phones captured everything. Multiple angles. Faces, audio, the exact sequence. Kessler didn't stop them. He couldn't. Too many people. Too many cameras. And the more he escalated, the more confident the diners got that they were watching something wrong in real time. Danielle, cuffed in the aisle, stopped trying to convince him with paperwork. She switched tactics. She stated, clearly and without drama, that she was a magistrate judge in the county. She said the arrest lacked probable cause. She said the whole diner just witnessed him ignore identification, ignore adoption documents, ignore staff confirmations, and ignore a child's own statement. That landed. Not because judge is magic, because it exposed what Kessler was doing. He wasn't carefully investigating. He was committing to a narrative and punishing Danielle for not playing submissive. Kessler reacted the way officers react when their target suddenly has status. He didn't instantly apologize. He didn't uncuff her. He didn't back up. He got sharper. He insisted she was resisting by speaking. He told her to stop talking. He told her she'd explain it downtown. He tried to move her toward the exit, like getting her out of the diner would save him from the witnesses and the recordings. That move almost worked too. For about a second. Because the second officer, still there, still holding the adoption papers earlier, looked uncomfortable now. Staff weren't backing down. Customers weren't backing down. Lily was crying harder, and that alone made the scene look even worse. And right as Kessler tried to steer Danielle away from the booth, he got told a supervisor was en route. Sergeant Mark Delaney. The room didn't relax. It held its breath. Danielle stayed upright, cuffed, calm, watching the door, not begging, not pleading, just waiting for someone with enough authority to stop the stupidity. Lily sat in the booth crying, staring at the aisle where her mom stood in handcuffs, and the entire diner knew this wasn't about a child's safety anymore. It was about an officer refusing to admit he was wrong. Sergeant Mark Delaney walked in and saw the whole thing in one glance. A crying 5-year-old in a booth, a black woman in cuffs in the aisle, staff frozen behind the counter, and a half circle of customers holding phones like they were documenting a crime scene. Delaney didn't start with chest thumping. He started with facts. He asked Kessler what the original call said. Vague welfare concern. Something doesn't look right. No description of danger, no allegation of force, nothing specific. Delaney asked what Kessler had verified. Kessler tried to sell non-compliance. He leaned on the usual phrasing, the kind that makes an arrest sound clean on paper. Danielle didn't interrupt. She let him talk. That's what confident people do when they know the record is about to bury someone. Delaney then asked for Danielle's name again. He stepped a few feet away and did the simplest check in the world. He pulled up the county court website on his phone. Danielle Harper, magistrate judge, listed publicly. Easy to confirm. Delaney's posture changed immediately. Not because Danielle was a judge, but because it proved something bigger. Kessler had ignored obvious exits. He had chosen escalation, and now he'd done it in a room full of witnesses. Delaney walked back, apologized directly, and personally removed the cuffs. No grand speech. Just a quick, clean correction, the way a supervisor does when the situation is indefensible. Danielle went straight back to Lily. She didn't chase revenge in the aisle. She focused on her kid first. She held Lily, calmed her down, and told staff to bring water and something small for Lily to hold. That's what mattered in that moment. Delaney pulled Kessler aside. Quiet but firm, he took control of the scene. He asked staff for statements and contact info. He asked the second officer to document what he'd reviewed, including the adoption paperwork. And the phones? They didn't stop recording. People had captured the full arc. The targeting, the radio code, the refusal to accept ID and documents, the arrest attempt, the child crying, the supervisor verifying online and uncuffing her. That video hit the internet fast. By that afternoon, local pages had it. By the next day, regional outlets picked it up. People weren't arguing about both sides. The footage made it plain. A random customer's discomfort triggered police action. Kessler treated an interracial family like a crime by default. Then, the city tried to survive it. Internal Affairs opened an investigation. The department requested Bodycam, radio logs, dispatch audio, and Kessler's report. They interviewed staff, diners, and the other responding officer. They compared timelines to the video and to the abduction code Kessler radioed. That's where Kessler's problem got worse. Investigators found he didn't just escalate. He also wrote it up like Danielle caused it. He claimed she refused basic cooperation. He framed the situation like he had reasonable suspicion that wasn't there. And witnesses contradicted him across the board. The second officer's notes undercut him too. Once that door opened, the department looked wider. They found a pattern, similar calls, similar stops, same theme. Black parents with white children getting treated like they needed to prove they belonged together. The department could see it in incident notes, in complaints, and in how certain suspicious person calls kept turning into child welfare investigations with no factual basis. Kessler got suspended while the review ran. Then he got terminated. Not for having a bad day, for policy violations and false statements in his report. That detail mattered because cities can excuse judgment calls. They can't as easily excuse documented dishonesty tied to rights violations, especially when the video exists. Danielle didn't keep it in-house. She filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Her claim wasn't complicated. The city's policies and enforcement allowed racial bias to become suspicion. Kessler detained and arrested without probable cause. Lily endured trauma from a baseless escalation in public. Witnesses and video proved the sequence. The department's own findings made it worse for the city, not better. The city tried to posture early, that's what they do. Then discovery loomed. Depositions, dispatch protocols, prior complaints, training records. If this went to trial, it wouldn't just be about Kessler. It would expose the system that let him act like that. So they settled. $2 million. Danielle didn't treat it like a lottery win. She treated it like an obligation with a plan. She secured Lily's future first. Education, stability, therapy support for the fear that got planted that morning. Then Danielle put money into legal aid work that helps families who don't have her credentials. Families who get crushed by failure to comply charges when they didn't do anything wrong. In the department, they made changes because they had to. They tightened response standards for vague something doesn't look right calls involving children. They pushed supervisors to review child abduction code decisions when the underlying facts were thin. They retrained officers on what reasonable suspicion actually requires. They also made dispatch language less suggestive because the first label can poison the whole encounter. A year later, Danielle went back to Maple Street with Lily. Same day of the week, same booth. Not because she forgot, because she refused to let the worst day steal a good tradition. She kept it controlled. She told staff ahead of time. She kept Lily comfortable. She made it normal again, on purpose. That's the piece people miss. Justice isn't only firing an officer or cutting a check. It's a family getting their life back without acting scared in public. So here's the question for you. If you were in that diner, would you have recorded? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked down at your plate and hoped it wasn't your problem? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with somebody who needs the reminder. And subscribe if you want more stories where bias meets the record and the record wins.
All right, don't move. What's in the bag?
Why you ask?
Open the bag. Now.
No, ma'am.
Don't fool me. I watched the handoff. That was a drug deal. Open it.
I'm not consenting to a search. If you have probable cause, say your facts.
You don't get to tell me what to do.
Racial profiling met constitutional limits in a city park when a patrol officer decided a bag handoff had to be a drug deal. then tried to force a search without a warrant, without consent, and without facts she could clearly explain. Officer Dana Kessler spotted the exchange from the walkway near the parking edge of the park. Two men met near a bench, spoke briefly, and one handed the other a small bag. The movement was quick, but not frantic. They didn't run, hide, or act like they were trying to disappear. They simply separated by a few steps and stayed in the same area. Kessler treated it like she'd just witnessed a crime. She approached with purpose, closed distance, and started directing the interaction instead of asking neutral questions. Her first focus was the bag. She wanted it opened. She wanted to look inside. She spoke like it was a normal procedure and like refusal would not be an option. One of the men, Malik Reed, didn't get loud and didn't get sarcastic. He kept his voice steady and his body language controlled. He asked if they were being detained and what crime she believed had occurred. When she repeated that she needed to see inside the bag, he made it clear he wasn't giving consent and that a search required a lawful basis. The second man, Evan Hart, held the bag and said very little. He stayed still, watched her hands, and let Malik handle the conversation. He didn't try to walk away quickly. He didn't argue with her. He didn't act nervous. He just didn't comply. Kessler didn't accept that boundary. She doubled down and tried to turn her suspicion into authority. She described what she saw as suspicious, and she treated that word like it replaced probable cause. She kept returning to the same demand, insisting the bag be opened immediately. She also started using the kind of vague safety language officers rely on when they don't have concrete facts. Public park, families nearby, children in the area. Something dangerous could be inside. Malik didn't debate emotions. He didn't try to talk her into liking him. He stayed on the rules. He repeated that a hunch wasn't enough, and he didn't give her extra information that could be twisted into justification. He kept asking the same core question. What specific facts supported a search right now? That's when the pressure tactic started. Kessler's tone sharpened. She tried ordering instead of asking. She hinted that refusing made them look guilty. She leaned on her badge and her role and acted as if that alone gave her the power to search. She positioned herself closer to the bag as if she might reach for it, and the interaction stopped being a conversation and started looking like it could turn into a property grab. People nearby noticed. A jogger slowed down on the path. A couple on a bench looked up and stayed watching. The officer was now performing in public, and her need to win the moment increased. Malik still didn't raise his voice. He didn't step toward her. He simply held his ground, kept his hands visible, and repeated that there was no consent and no lawful basis. Evan remained calm and kept the bag secure, not tugging it away, not making sudden movements, and not giving her the reaction she seemed to want. Kessler got frustrated and said the quiet part out loud. She made a racist remark, pointing them toward the ghetto, as if that explained why she was treating them like suspects. It wasn't a legal argument. It wasn't officer safety. It was bias, slipping out in front of witnesses. That moment changed the entire tone of the encounter. Malik didn't respond with insults or anger. He paused, then kept his focus on legality and accountability, because he understood what escalation would give her. An excuse to change the narrative from unlawful search attempt to non-compliant subject. Evan finally spoke, and he spoke to end the situation, not to argue. He identified himself as United States Secret Service. He stated that the bag was tied to a secure transfer connected to his work. He did not explain the contents in detail because he didn't need to and because he wasn't going to disclose sensitive information to a local officer in a public park. He made one point clear. Her attempt to detain them and force a search was interfering with a federal protective function. Kessler's confidence collapsed immediately. Her posture shifted, her voice softened. She stepped back, apologized, and disengaged as fast as she could. right after the hook. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Country, state, or city. And if you watch these stories because you care about rights, accountability, and people staying calm under pressure, hit like and subscribe. Now, here's what led up to that moment, because Kessler didn't just stumble into this. She made a series of choices, and each one pushed her closer to a line she couldn't explain away once the wrong person turned out to be involved. Kessler backed away, but she didn't fully leave right away. She hovered in that awkward zone officers slip into when they realize they've overplayed their hand and now need an exit that doesn't look like defeat. Her first move was to try to reset the story. She asked for identification again, but the tone changed. Less command, more careful. The kind of careful that shows up when someone suddenly remembers reports exist, body cameras exist, and people standing 10 feet away can hear everything. Evan kept it controlled. He didn't argue about her bias. He didn't lecture her about the Constitution. He did what federal agents do when a local stop starts drifting into a problem. He narrowed the conversation, stated his role, and made it clear she was interfering with something she didn't understand. Malik stayed steady too. He didn't win loudly. He didn't taunt. He simply held the line that mattered. No consent, no search, no seizure. That mattered because the officer was still looking for a way to claim she had permission or a legal reason. Without that, she had nothing. Kessler tried a different angle. She framed the encounter like she was doing a normal welfare check for the park. She referenced families nearby again, trying to make it sound like her behavior had been about safety from the start. The problem was that everyone had just watched her demand the bag be opened, as if she already decided it was drugs. That shift didn't match what people saw. Evan cut through the fog. He told her the transfer was secure, time-sensitive, and not open to her inspection. He also made it clear that if she continued to block them or tried to take the bag, it would become a federal issue fast. This is where Kessler's radio came into play. She turned slightly away and keyed up. Not a long call, not a full breakdown, but enough to get guidance and cover herself. The language she used sounded like she wanted permission to keep pushing, but she couldn't say, "I want to search a bag because I assumed drugs." She had to dress it up as suspicious activity and refusal to comply. She didn't get the green light she wanted. Even the most aggressive supervisor knows a problem when they hear one. No clear crime, no articulable facts. A consent search attempt going sideways in public. Add a federal credential in the mix, and the smart response becomes disengage. Kessler returned to the men and shifted into damage control. She apologized. Not a full ownership apology, more like a quick exit apology. The kind that tries to close the interaction without creating a clean soundbite of admission. She stepped back further, told them they were free to go, and tried to end it like it had been routine. Malik didn't let the record get rewritten in real time. He reminded her calmly that she had demanded a search without a warrant and without probable cause. He didn't argue back and forth. He stated it once so it was clear, and so it would sit in her memory the way it needed to. That mattered because officers often try to walk away with the last word. Malik didn't chase the last word. He made sure the facts didn't get buried. Evan kept his focus on finishing the transfer. He moved with purpose, not speed. He didn't want to look like he was fleeing, and he didn't want to invite another round of suspicion. He and Malik walked away normally, the same way they had been standing there, normally before Kessler decided the scene needed a villain. The bystanders didn't just forget what they heard. A few people had phones out by the time the racist remark landed. Nobody needed a cinematic angle. The park was quiet enough. The words carried. Kessler had created witnesses the moment she raised her voice and tried to force compliance. She couldn't take that back. Within minutes, Malik and Evan were away from the immediate area, and Evan made a call. Not dramatic, not angry. Operational. He needed his chain of command to know a local officer had interfered attempted to search, and injected bias into the interaction. Protective work runs on documentation. If something goes wrong later, the question is always the same: who knew and when? Malik did his own version of that. He didn't post immediately. He didn't rant. He took note of the badge number, the time, the location, and what was said. That's what people learn to do after they've seen how quickly a bad report can turn into a clean excuse for misconduct. Memory isn't enough. Details matter. Kessler, meanwhile, didn't drive off feeling proud. She drove off trying to figure out what would land on her desk first: a complaint, a supervisor question, or a request for her body camera. Because now there were two problems instead of one. The first problem was legal. She tried to force a search with no clear, lawful basis. The second problem was personal. She exposed bias out loud, in public, while acting like she had unquestionable authority. And those two together don't stay contained. By the time Kessler cleared the park loop, she had already started building her version of events in her head. Officers do that when they know they push too far. They start thinking about how it'll sound in a report, not what actually happened. She couldn't write, "I assumed it was drugs." So she went with the usual cover words: suspicious exchange, high visibility area, public safety concern, refusal to comply. She also couldn't cleanly explain why she demanded the bag be opened without consent, without a warrant, and without a specific crime. That gap mattered, because reports don't just document what happened. They become the department's shield if someone complains. This time, the shield didn't fit. Evan's side documented the interference immediately, not because he wanted to punish a random cop, but because protective work runs on clear records. When a local officer inserts herself into something sensitive, that becomes a security issue. It also becomes a liability issue. His supervisors needed a paper trail showing what occurred, what was said, and how quickly it was resolved. Malik documented for a different reason. He had learned that if you don't lock down details early, someone else will rewrite them for you. He noted the time, the location, the sequence, and the remark. He also tracked who was nearby, because witnesses always matter when the official story starts drifting. Within a couple days, the situation moved from annoying park stop to department problem. A complaint landed with the precinct. It wasn't vague, it wasn't emotional. It listed the attempted search, the lack of stated probable cause, the pressure tactics, and the racist comment. That last part turned it from a training issue into a credibility issue. Bias on the record creates questions a department can't ignore because it doesn't stay a private embarrassment. It becomes a pattern risk. Kessler got called in. She didn't walk into that meeting expecting applause. She walked in hoping it would be a quick reminder and a warning. That's how officers often think these things go when there's no arrest and no injury. This wasn't that. Her supervisor asked for her articulation. What crime did she believe was happening? What specific facts supported a detention? What facts supported a search request? What created probable cause? Those questions sound simple until you try to answer them without leaning on vibes. She fell back on what she had. The exchange looked suspicious. That didn't land. Not the way she needed. The review also didn't stay inside her unit because Secret Service changes how people react. Even if Evan never demanded action, the mere fact that a federal protective detail got hassled during a secure transfer force conversation between agencies. The department didn't want a reputation for interfering with federal operations, and they definitely didn't want to argue that a hunch justified it. Then came the body camera review. That part hurt her more than any complaint summary, because video doesn't negotiate. It doesn't accept rewritten context. It shows tone. It shows escalation. It shows whether the officer asked questions or issued orders. It also captures the moment the racist comment hit the air. Once that was confirmed, Kessler lost the benefit of doubt she'd been counting on. The outcome stayed realistic. No movie ending, no instant firing and handcuffs. Departments rarely move like that unless there's something extreme. What she got instead was the kind of discipline that actually happens: a formal reprimand, mandatory bias and constitutional policing retraining, and removal from discretionary park patrol for a period. Her supervisor also put a clear note in her file about unlawful search pressure and inappropriate remarks. That note matters long term. It follows you. A separate directive went out to patrol units after the review. It reminded officers that suspicious isn't probable cause, refusal isn't justification, and consent has to be voluntary. It also warned that derogatory remarks during stops trigger immediate scrutiny. It wasn't framed as because of Kessler, but everyone knew why it existed. Malik didn't get a payday. He didn't get a dramatic apology tour. What he got was something people rarely get in these moments: confirmation on paper that he was right to hold the line. He also got clarity. He saw how fast an officer could go from "I'm checking on something" to "open the bag now," and how quickly a biased assumption could become an attempted search. That reinforced a lesson he already lived by. Staying calm isn't weakness, it's control. You don't give an officer extra material to work with. You don't let them turn your reaction into their justification. Evan's takeaway was different, but just as blunt. He understood local cops have a hard job. He also understood that some officers treat public spaces like personal jurisdictions, where compliance is the goal and law is optional. That's why he escalated through his chain, and why his unit had the incident logged. Not for revenge, for oversight and prevention. Weeks later, Malik attended a community legal workshop and spoke briefly about the encounter. No grandstanding, no anti-cop speech, just practical points. Ask if you're detained. Don't consent to searches you don't want. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue in circles. And document everything. People in the room nodded because they recognized the pattern. Some shared their own stories afterward. Kessler kept working, but the encounter changed how people saw her inside the department. A racist remark on camera doesn't disappear. It becomes something coworkers remember. Supervisors watch you closer, the public watches you closer. The next time she tried to lean on "trust me," she wouldn't get it automatically. That's the real consequence. Not a headline, not a viral victory. A damaged credibility record and tighter oversight, because she showed she couldn't separate suspicion from bias and couldn't separate authority from legality. Here's the point that sticks. The Fourth Amendment doesn't shrink because an officer feels certain. Probable cause doesn't appear because someone refuses consent. And when an officer tries to force compliance without a lawful basis, the situation doesn't become legal just because they keep repeating orders louder. So what would you have done in Malik's position? Stayed silent? Asked for a supervisor? Record it openly. Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a stop that felt like assumption dressed up as law, share what happened. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next story.
Step away from the vehicle now.
What's the problem, sir?
Whose car is this? Where'd you get it?
This is my car. The fob's acting up. My license and registration are inside because the doors won't unlock.
So you can't prove it.
Got it. You can prove it in 30 seconds. Run the plate.
Don't tell me how to do my job.
Verify.
Shut up, you're under arrest.
Officer Caleb Rourke moved fast, like he'd already decided how the story ended. He'd seen Jamal Carter walking through the shopping center parking lot toward a matte gray Lamborghini Urus. Expensive car. Black man. Jamal reached the driver door, pressed his key fob, and nothing happened. He pressed again. He checked the fob, then tried from a different angle, closer to the handle like most people do when a remote acts up. Rourke read that small struggle as a theft in progress. He pulled in hard, got out with his hand close to his holster, and started issuing commands for Jamal to step away from the vehicle. The tone said, "Suspect, not citizen." Shoppers nearby slowed down, heads turned. Phones came out the way they always do now. Jamal didn't panic. He didn't match Rourke's energy either. He explained that the key fob had gotten wet earlier and it wasn't responding. He told Rourke the car was his. He also explained the problem with proving it on the spot. His ID and registration were inside the locked vehicle. Rourke didn't treat that as a normal explanation. He treated it like a lie he'd heard before. Instead of doing what basic procedure allows, running the plate, Rourke stayed locked onto the same assumption. He kept Jamal away from the door, didn't let him try the manual key, didn't ask for a second form of verification, and didn't call for a supervisor to slow the situation down. Jamal asked for a simple check, run the plate, confirm the registered owner, verify the VIN if needed. Anything that made this quick and clean. Rourke refused. A younger officer arrived during the escalation, Officer Lena Park. She watched the scene for a few seconds and suggested the obvious steps. Run the plate, contact the registered owner, and handle it like a possible misunderstanding until facts said otherwise. Rourke shut that down immediately. He wasn't interested in a plate check, and he wasn't interested in being corrected in front of witnesses. He kept pushing the same idea. Jamal looked like someone trying to get into a car that wasn't his, so that was enough for him. Then he made the decision that turned the whole encounter from aggressive to unlawful. Rourke arrested Jamal for attempted grand theft auto. He did it in the open, in front of people who hadn't seen anything except a guy pressing a key fob. Jamal stayed composed while being handcuffed, but the humiliation still landed. He repeated again that the car was his and that verification would clear it up within minutes. Rourke ignored that and took it a step further. He called for the Urus to be towed, treating it like evidence of a crime he hadn't proven. The tow request went through, and the vehicle got loaded up while Jamal sat in the back of a patrol car, still trying to get someone, anyone, to do the most basic verification. Rourke transported him to the station and started the booking process like he'd just solved a major case. What Rourke didn't know was that Jamal wasn't a random driver. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't a freak situation. The department had set this up as a controlled integrity test after months of racial profiling complaints tied to Rourke. Jamal worked compliance for the same department. His job included auditing stops, arrests, and evidence handling. The Urus had a hidden camera inside it for this test, and the whole point was to watch what Rourke did when assumptions met a chance to verify. Rourke had already shown his pattern. He chose suspicion first, and he treated verification like an inconvenience. Now the test moved into the next stage, and it wasn't going to get easier for him. At the station, Rourke acted like the hardest part was over. He had a body in a holding room and a report to write. That's how officers like him calm themselves down. Paper turns a bad decision into something that looks official. Jamal kept it simple. He repeated the same facts, same request, run the plate, confirm the registered owner, check the tow record, and meet the car at impound if they had to. He didn't plead. He didn't rant. He pushed for verification because verification was the whole point. Rourke didn't want that check done. He booked Jamal an attempted grand theft auto anyway, and framed the evidence as behavior, pressing a fob, standing at a driver door. Unable to produce proof, he wrote it like Jamal's locked documents were some kind of trick instead of a normal reality when your keys stop working. Officer Lena Park showed up again while the paperwork started. She didn't have Rourke's rank, but she had enough sense to see where this was headed. She suggested again that they verify ownership before the case went any further. Plate and registration were fast. Dispatch could handle it. A supervisor could clear it. The whole thing could be corrected before it became a lawsuit. Rourke cut her off and told her to stay in her lane. His posture wasn't about safety anymore. It was about control. He'd already committed to the narrative in public. Now he needed the station to follow it. Jamal asked to speak to a supervisor. He asked for his property to be verified. He asked for a phone call connected to the registered owner because the registered owner was him. Everything he requested was normal, and nothing he requested required anyone to trust him. It only required someone to check. Rourke delayed, deflected, and kept working the case like checking would contaminate it. He told himself he'd do it later, after the report, after the tow. after the shift. That's a classic move when an officer senses he's wrong, but doesn't want to admit it while the moment is still hot. Hours passed. Jamal sat through the holding process while Rourke built a file around the same thin premise. The longer it went, the harder it would be for Rourke to back out without looking reckless. Tow records hit the system. The Urus landed at impound. That should have been the clean exit ramp for Rourke. Go there, open the vehicle properly, recover ID and registration, confirm ownership, document the misunderstanding, and release Jamal. Rourke chose a different path. He drove to the impound lot alone. That part mattered. If this was truly an honest investigation, he'd bring another officer or he'd coordinate with evidence staff. Instead, he went like someone who wanted privacy and speed. He checked in, presented himself as the arresting officer, and got access to the vehicle using department tools and impound cooperation. Once he got into the Urus, the proof sat exactly where Jamal said it would. Wallet, registration, clean, boring ownership documents that erased the entire basis for the arrest. Rourke stood there with a choice. He could take the documents back to the station, correct the arrest, and write it up as a misread situation. Embarrassing, sure, but fixable. A clean correction would have looked like accountability. He didn't do that. He removed the wallet and registration and kept them. He didn't log them. He didn't photograph them as part of his investigation. He didn't notify anyone that he'd confirmed ownership. He treated the proof like a problem that needed to disappear. Then he left the vehicle and returned to the station with the story already prepared. He claimed he found nothing that verified ownership. And that's where the case stopped being about bias and started being about intent. Back at the station, Jamal asked again whether anyone had checked the vehicle. Rourke told him it hadn't been verified. He kept the booking moving. He kept the report moving. He kept the charge alive. Jamal didn't argue with him. He didn't need to. He watched how far Rourke was willing to go to protect a wrong assumption. Because this wasn't just an arrest scenario. It was an integrity test. The Urus had a hidden camera positioned for exactly the stage, aimed to capture what happened if someone got inside and handled documents. That camera recorded Rourke's hands, the wallet, the registration, and the decision to remove them. The system also logged his access at impound. So now there were three things Rory Kite couldn't talk his way out of: the tow record, the access record, and the video. Jamal stayed in holding that night longer than he should have because Rourke wouldn't admit what he'd seen. The department's leadership stayed quiet on purpose because they needed the full picture. They needed to know whether Rourke would correct himself when facts showed up, or whether he'd manipulate the process to keep his original claim alive. Rourke had just given them the answer. Rourke came in the next day, believing he'd contained the damage. He'd already done the two things officers like him rely on when they know a stop went bad. He'd put Jamal in cuffs fast, and he'd locked his version of events into a report. Once that's done, the system tends to roll forward on momentum. People assume the arrest happened for a reason. Supervisors skim for obvious problems. Prosecutors trust that the officer didn't invent the facts. Rourke counted on all of that. He didn't realize the department had been watching him for months. The captain had a folder of complaints tied to Rourke. Not one dramatic incident, a pattern. Stops that started with vague suspicion. Searches that didn't match the facts. Charges that fell apart when anyone looked closely. People complaining they were treated like criminals first and humans second. Each time, it got softened into miscommunication or officer discretion. No one wanted to be the supervisor who called out a veteran and triggered union drama. So the captain authorized a controlled integrity test, not a stunt, a procedure, a way to get clear answers without waiting for the next bad stop to become a lawsuit. That's why Jamal was there. Jamal wasn't a civilian picked at random. He worked department compliance. His job was to audit stops, arrests, and evidence handling. He didn't just read reports. He checked whether the behavior matched the policies the department claimed to enforce. The Urus was registered to him. The camera inside wasn't hidden for entertainment. It was there to document what mattered, the moment an officer had the chance to verify ownership, and whether that officer chose truth or chose control. Rourke had already failed the first part in the parking lot. He saw Jamal struggling with a key fob and treated it like proof of theft. He didn't verify. He escalated. He arrested. He ordered the tow. Then he stayed stubborn at the station when a younger officer suggested the basic steps that would have fixed it quickly. That still could have been written off as a bad call. Then came impound. Rourke went there alone. He didn't coordinate with evidence staff. He didn't ask for a witness officer. He didn't treat it like a neutral verification process. He treated it like a private errand, something he could handle without anyone looking too closely. He accessed the vehicle using departmental authority. He got inside. He found the wallet and registration Jamal said were there. Clean proof. No ambiguity. Ownership tied to Jamal. Matching the plate, matching the vehicle. At that point, a reasonable officer would have done the boring fix. Document the verification, notify the supervisor, amend the report, release the detainee, and write up the reason for the initial suspicion without pretending it was stronger than it was. Rourke chose the opposite. He removed the wallet and registration and kept them out of the case record. No logging, no entry in evidence, no photo attached to the report, no call to the station saying ownership was confirmed. He took the proof and then returned as if he'd found nothing. That's the moment the situation stopped being about mistaken suspicion and became about intentional deception. Back at the station, he kept the booking moving. He kept repeating that Jamal couldn't prove the car was his. He kept treating Jamal's calm requests to verify as if they were part of a con. The longer it went, the more he needed everyone else to accept the story because backing out would expose what he'd done at impound. The department didn't intervene right away. That delay was part of the integrity test. They weren't looking for a quick correction. They were measuring decision-making under pressure and under pride. They needed to know what he did when the facts were sitting right in front of him. He chose to bury them. The next morning, the captain called him in. No casual check-in. No, walk me through it in a friendly tone. A direct summons. Rourke walked in expecting criticism. He didn't expect the room. Jamal sat inside already, not in cuffs, not treated as a detainee. Jamal didn't smirk. He didn't act triumphant. He looked like someone doing his job and letting the process speak for itself. The captain had Rourke explain the arrest from the beginning. Rourke stayed confident. He framed the parking lot behavior as criminal. He emphasized Jamal's inability to produce documents right there, twisting the locked car problem into suspicious failure to identify. He talked like decisiveness was the same as correctness. The captain then narrowed it down to the only point that mattered: impound access. Rourke confirmed he accessed the Urus. The captain asked what he recovered. Rourke stuck with the lie. He claimed he found nothing that proved ownership. The captain didn't argue and he didn't lecture. He played the footage. The video showed Rourke entering the vehicle, locating the wallet and registration, removing them, and leaving with them. Clear hands, clear items, clear choice. The camera didn't capture a misunderstanding, it captured a decision. Then the captain explained the part Rourke hadn't seen coming. Jamal worked compliance. This was a controlled test. The camera was placed intentionally. The department ran it because Rourke had a history that couldn't be ignored anymore. Rourke tried to shift into justification. He tried to make it sound like procedure, like he was securing property, like he was protecting the scene. None of that explained why he returned and claimed he found nothing. None of that explained why Jamal stayed in custody, while the proof sat in Rourke's possession. The captain ordered him to surrender his badge and weapon immediately. Rourke hesitated, then argued. Not shouting, but pushing. That tone officers use when they think rank or confidence can bend the room. The captain didn't budge. A supervisor stood by, while Rourke handed everything over. The captain ended his employment right there. with documentation prepared and witnesses present. Termination was only the start. The department notified investigators who weren't tied to Rourke's chain of command. They collected the missing wallet and registration. They preserved the impound footage. They pulled tow records and impound access logs to show he had been there and when. They pulled the body cam from the parking lot to capture the initial approach and escalation. They pulled station footage to show Jamal's repeated requests to verify and Rourke's refusals. They pulled dispatch audio to confirm whether any attempt to run the plate happened when it should have. The timeline aligned cleanly, and it looked worse each time they laid it out. He assumed theft without verification. He refused verification when it was offered. He found proof that he was wrong. He concealed that proof. He reported the opposite. Investigators didn't have to interpret his intent. His actions spelled it out. Rourke was arrested for false imprisonment, evidence tampering, filing a false report, and civil rights violations under color of law. Those weren't technical charges. They matched what he did. He used authority to detain someone without proper basis, then manipulated evidence and records to keep the detention from collapsing. The story went public quickly once the termination and arrest hit official channels. The public didn't need a long explanation. They saw the same simple picture. A black man got arrested near his own car because an officer decided he didn't belong near it, and when that officer found proof, he tried to make the proof disappear. That's why it spread. Once it did, the department couldn't pretend it was one bad day. Review teams pulled Rourke's history. They compared complaints to his reports, his stop data, and the outcomes of cases he initiated. They found more weak stops, more escalation, more situations where verification would have ended it but didn't. The review also highlighted leadership failures. Supervisors who ignored patterns, people who signed off on paperwork they should have challenged, a culture that treated citizen complaints like background noise. Some supervisors caught discipline. Some got removed from roles that required direct oversight. Policy changes followed because the department needed structural fixes, not just a scapegoat. At trial, Rourke tried to lean on the usual defense. He claimed he acted reasonably based on what he perceived in the parking lot. That argument collapsed at the same point every time: impound. A jury can understand a mistake. They don't excuse hiding proof and lying in a report. The concealment wasn't a split-second decision. It was deliberate, it was quiet, and it was documented. The convictions followed. Jamal returned to his normal work after, and the department used the case in training. The lesson wasn't complicated, and it didn't need motivational speeches. Verify first. Slow down when the facts are easy to check. Don't turn a hunch into cuffs. If you're wrong, correct it immediately. The moment an officer starts protecting ego instead of truth, the job is already gone. Cameras, logs, and oversight don't care about someone's confidence. They care about what happened. Now, be honest. If you were Officer Park, watching that arrest and hearing Jamal ask for verification, would you have pushed harder, documented it, or gone straight to a supervisor? Comment your answer, share the story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more real accountability stories told straight.
Turn around. Hands behind your back. For what?
Yeah,
Don't debate me. Turn around.
I'm not debating. I'm asking why you're searching me. I gave you my ID. I'm standing right here.
Racial profiling turned into a constitutional problem in a nearly empty supermarket in Cedar Ridge, Ohio, when Officer Trent Callahan walked up on Daniel Brooks in the dairy aisle and treated a routine grocery run like a criminal investigation. Callahan approached with that controlled, predatory confidence some officers use when they think the space belongs to them. He positioned himself close enough to block Daniel's path and started asking questions that weren't casual or friendly. He claimed Daniel was acting suspicious, but he didn't explain what that meant in real terms. No report of theft, no call from the store, no specific accusation. Daniel didn't give him a reason to escalate. He kept his voice steady and his movements slow. He answered what he could, and when Callahan demanded identification, Daniel handed over a valid ID without argument. That should have been the end of it, especially after Callahan checked the information and found nothing that justified keeping Daniel there. Instead, Callahan stayed locked in. While Daniel stood waiting, the atmosphere around them shifted. A young shopper nearby noticed what was happening and started recording on her phone. Another customer slowed down at the end of the aisle, watching closely. The store itself was already recording too, with ceiling cameras covering the dairy section from multiple angles. Callahan either didn't notice or didn't care. He kept building pressure, trying to turn Daniel's calm into a problem. Right after checking the ID, Callahan changed the tone. He started describing Daniel's basic questions as defiance, as if asking why he was being stopped was the same thing as refusing orders. Then he gave a new command. Daniel needed to turn around and submit to a search. That was the moment it stopped looking like concern and started looking like control. Callahan still didn't name a crime. He didn't point to probable cause. He didn't explain what he believed Daniel had done. He just acted like the badge itself was enough to justify whatever he wanted next. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to walk away. He didn't swing the conversation into drama. He asked a simple question about the reason for the search, because that reason matters. Callahan treated that question like disrespect, and his posture got sharper. He spoke louder, not to communicate, but to dominate the space and signal to anyone watching that he was in charge. The phone stayed up. One witness moved slightly to keep the camera clear. Another customer started speaking up, challenging the situation openly, and calling out that Daniel had been cooperating the entire time. Callahan didn't back down. He doubled down. He repeated his vague justification, leaned closer, and ordered Daniel to comply again, this time with less patience and more threat in his voice. Daniel remained steady, but the tension was obvious now, because everyone could see what was coming next. An officer who couldn't justify his actions was about to force the situation anyway. And in that dairy aisle, under bright lights and multiple cameras, Callahan moved from harassment into physical escalation. Callahan didn't wait for a real legal reason to appear. He acted like his suspicion was enough. He stepped in closer, told Daniel to turn around again, and reached toward him as if the search had already been approved by someone higher than the Constitution. Daniel didn't jerk away or get loud. He stayed in place and kept his hands visible, because he understood the trap. If he flinched, Callahan would call it resistance. If he argued, Callahan would call it a threat. Daniel tried to keep it simple. He kept asking for the reason for the search, because that question matters and it's not aggressive. Callahan treated it like a challenge anyway. His voice rose, not because the store got dangerous, but because he wanted witnesses to hear orders and assume Daniel caused whatever happened next. The search started with grabbing. Callahan put hands on Daniel's arm and shoulder and turned him with unnecessary force, hard enough that Daniel's shopping items shifted and bumped the shelf. A couple cartons slid forward. Something hit the floor. The sound snapped heads around from the next aisle. Two things happened at once. Daniel tightened up because anyone would, but he didn't swing or shove back. At the same time, the witnesses got braver because the physical line had been crossed, and they could see it clearly. One customer told Callahan to stop putting hands on him like that. Another asked what crime Daniel was even being searched for. Callahan didn't answer the substance. He went straight to control language, warning people to back up and mind their business. Like being a public employee meant he could shut down public accountability. The phone stayed pointed at him. That mattered more than Callahan realized. A single angle can be argued. Multiple angles with consistent audio and calm behavior from Daniel, that's a different problem. It limits the officer's ability to rewrite the event later. Callahan kept the search going anyway. He ran his hands along Daniel's pockets and waistband area in a way that looked less like a quick safety check and more like punishment for not acting scared. Nothing came out of it. No weapon, no stolen items, no contraband, no reason to keep going. A normal officer would have stopped right there. Callahan didn't. He pushed Daniel again, this time with visible impatience, and pinned him into the edge of the cooler area like the physical dominance itself was the point. The grip marks showed fast. His hands weren't placed like careful procedure. They were placed like ownership. That's when an employee saw what was happening and moved quickly toward the front. She didn't try to intervene directly. She went to get the manager because she understood something important. The fastest way to break an officer's narrative control is to bring in someone with authority inside the store who can speak clearly on record. Miguel Alvarez, the manager, arrived within minutes. He didn't come in yelling. He came in focused. He took in the scene in one glance. Daniel standing controlled, Callahan too close and too physical, witnesses recording, items knocked loose near the shelf. Miguel didn't guess. He didn't ask Callahan if he needed anything. He went straight to accountability. Miguel stated that Daniel was welcome in the store and that no employee had reported Daniel as a problem. He also stated that the store had cameras covering the aisle and that the footage would be preserved. He said it clearly enough for the phones to capture and for the ceiling cameras to record the moment as it happened. That changed everything. Callahan couldn't rely on later paperwork to control the story if the manager was already on video contradicting his implied justification. He couldn't claim the store called him if the manager was saying the opposite on record. He couldn't claim Daniel was aggressive if the witnesses had been filming Daniel staying composed while being handled roughly. Callahan tried to regain control by shifting attention back onto Daniel, repeating that Daniel was being uncooperative and that the situation was about safety. Miguel didn't bite. He kept it fact-based and kept the focus on what could be proven. Daniel stayed calm through it, but the moment wasn't small anymore. It wasn't one officer and one shopper in an aisle. It was a public confrontation with multiple recordings and a store manager anchoring the timeline. Callahan now had a choice. He could end it and walk away with nothing, or he could keep escalating and create evidence that would follow him out of that store. And he chose wrong. Miguel's arrival removed Callahan's biggest advantage. No private hallway, no empty street corner, no, it's my word versus yours. The aisle had cameras overhead, phones at eye level, and a store manager on record stating there hadn't been any complaint. Callahan felt that shift and tried to overpower it. He started talking louder and faster, pushing his own version of the situation into the air as if volume could replace legal justification. He kept insisting Daniel was not cooperating, even though the entire sequence showed Daniel staying in place, keeping his hands visible, and answering what he could. Callahan's language wasn't aimed at Daniel anymore. It was aimed at the footage. He wanted a soundtrack that made force sound reasonable. Miguel didn't argue feelings. He stuck to facts. He repeated that Daniel hadn't caused a disturbance. He repeated that cameras covered the aisle. He made it clear the footage would be preserved and turned over if needed. He didn't say it as a threat. He said it like policy because that's what made it powerful. Witnesses took that as a permission to keep recording. The older customer stepped closer, not into Callahan's space, but close enough to make it obvious he wasn't backing down. The young woman filming adjusted her angle so Callahan couldn't block the view with his body. Another shopper at the end of the aisle started narrating what they were seeing out loud, keeping the timeline clean for the recording. Callahan tried switching tactics. He shifted from suspicious behavior to the usual fallback, officer safety. He acted like Daniel's calm questions created danger. He acted like the store needed him to take control. None of it matched what people were watching. Then his patience broke. He grabbed Daniel again, harder this time, and shoved him back into the cooler area. The movement jolted Daniel's shoulder and left a clear mark where Callahan's hand had been. A couple more items slid and hit the floor. That sound mattered because it made the force feel real to everyone nearby. Nobody could pretend this was routine after that. Miguel told Callahan to stop putting hands on a customer who wasn't resisting. Callahan snapped back at him and warned him to stay out of it. Miguel didn't move away. He didn't escalate either. He kept his position and kept repeating that the store's cameras had everything and that the footage would be saved immediately. Callahan realized he was boxed in by evidence. That's when the mask slipped. He stopped trying to justify the search and moved straight into dominance. He threatened arrest without clearly stating a lawful basis. He talked about obstruction, when the only thing happening was witnesses filming and a manager stating what the store observed. He tried to intimidate people into deleting footage. That part landed badly because it sounded exactly like what it was: an officer trying to control what would exist after he left. Daniel held steady through all of it. He didn't posture, he didn't plead, he didn't argue in circles. He focused on two things: staying safe and making sure the facts stayed clean. At a certain point, Daniel stopped engaging with Callahan's bait and started speaking in a way that made sense for the cameras and witnesses. He clearly communicated that he had provided ID, that no crime had been named, that the search found nothing, and that the use of force wasn't justified. Calm delivery. Simple sequence. No theatrics. The calm timeline did damage. Callahan couldn't turn Daniel into a threat if Daniel wouldn't act like one. He couldn't build a story about aggression when Daniel's voice stayed controlled and his body language stayed contained. Miguel then took the next step that really sealed it. He instructed an employee to preserve the footage immediately and to flag the relevant camera angles. He said it out loud so it would be captured on the witness recordings too. That wasn't just a managerial move. It was evidence preservation in real time, and Callahan knew it. Now there was no clean exit with the narrative intact. Callahan finally backed off physically, but he still tried to leave the scene with a threat hanging in the air. He told Daniel, in effect, that this wasn't over and that he could still make it a problem if he wanted to. That was the last attempt at control. Daniel didn't take the bait. He didn't trade threats. He didn't insult him. He ended it with a line that stayed focused on boundaries and law, not ego. He made it clear that force without cause doesn't become legal just because an officer insists it is. Callahan walked away angry. Daniel stayed standing, breathing steady with witnesses still filming, and Miguel already moving to lock down the footage. The confrontation ended in the aisle, but the consequences started right there too, because enough people had captured enough angles to make sure nobody could rewrite what happened later. By the time Callahan left the dairy aisle, the story already existed outside of his control. 3 separate phone videos captured the same timeline from different angles. The store's ceiling cameras covered the aisle from above. Miguel had an employee pull the exact time window and flag the footage so it couldn't accidentally disappear later. That one decision stopped the usual playbook before it even started. Daniel didn't hang around arguing after the officer stepped away. He did what experienced people do when they know the next part is paperwork, not talking. He took photos of the marks on his arm and shoulder while the redness was fresh and easy to see. He asked Miguel for the incident report number from the store side and made sure Miguel had his contact information. He also got witness names and numbers while they were still standing there, because people mean well and still vanish once real life kicks back in. Later that night, Daniel went to get checked out. Not for drama, for documentation. Medical notes don't care about police narratives. They care about what happened to a body. The first clip hit social media before midnight. It wasn't edited into something misleading. It didn't need to be. The raw footage showed an officer escalating after receiving valid ID, ordering a search without naming a specific crime, then getting physical when he didn't get instant submission. The audio mattered too. The witnesses weren't screaming. They were asking basic questions any reasonable person would ask. What's the reason? What's the crime? Why are you putting hands on him? The department put out a standard statement within a day. They tried to frame it as a routine contact, where the officer felt concern. That language didn't land because people had already watched the interaction. Routine doesn't look like shoving a calm shopper in a grocery aisle while a manager says there was no complaint. Public pressure forced the issue out into the open. The chief couldn't bury it with a quiet counseling session or a paid suspension that ended with everyone pretending nothing happened. Callahan got placed on administrative leave almost immediately. Then Daniel hired Aisha Grant. Aisha didn't build the case around feelings. She built it around structure, timeline, policies, department procedures, use of force standards, search and seizure rules. She secured every angle of video she could, not just the viral ones. She obtained the store footage through preservation requests and made sure it was authenticated. She interviewed the witnesses while their memories still matched the recordings. Then she did the part that departments hate most. She went backwards. She pulled Callahan's history, complaints, prior allegations, internal notes, patterns in how he described black men as suspicious, patterns in how his reports used vague language right before force happened, patterns in how supervisors minimized it. One complaint might get dismissed as unclear. A stack becomes a warning they chose to ignore. Once that pattern became part of the record, the story shifted from one bad night to a department let this keep happening. Prosecutors got involved faster than Cedar Ridge was used to. The video evidence made it hard to hide behind uncertainty. The witnesses made it hard to claim Daniel started it. Miguel made it hard to claim the store wanted Callahan there. The search finding nothing made it hard to claim the escalation was based on an actual threat. Charges followed that focused on what could be proven. Assault tied to the unnecessary physical handling, abuse of authority tied to the unlawful search and detention, and civil rights violations tied to the lack of legal justification and the way Callahan tried to punish compliance that didn't feel submissive enough. Callahan tried to defend it with the same phrases he used in the aisle: officer safety, suspicion, non-compliance. The courtroom didn't run on vibes. The recordings didn't support him. The timeline didn't support him. His own decisions didn't support him. The criminal case ended in a conviction and a prison sentence. The civil case hit next, and that's where the department's bigger exposure showed. Aisha argued not only that Callahan violated Daniel's rights, but that the department had warning signs and failed to act. Supervisors had the ability to intervene earlier and didn't. Training and oversight were treated like paperwork instead of protection. That negligence mattered. The settlement was large enough to make Cedar Ridge change its posture, not just its press releases. The department agreed to reforms that had real mechanics behind them: improved training on constitutional stops and searches, stronger reporting requirements, outside oversight on complaint investigations, and an early warning system to flag repeat complaint officers before they stack up years of damage. Then the final detail came out, and it landed with extra weight. Daniel Brooks wasn't just a shopper. He was a U.S. Marshal, a federal law enforcement professional, high-risk assignments, real training, real experience. He knew what lawful stops looked like. He also knew exactly what happened to him in that aisle wasn't lawful, and he handled it with the discipline to keep the evidence clean. That reveal didn't make the incident more serious because Daniel wore a badge in another part of his life. It made it more serious because it proved the point people already knew. If profiling can happen to a trained law enforcement officer buying groceries, it can happen to anyone. Bias doesn't pause for credentials. Cedar Ridge tried to move on after the reforms, but the story stuck because it had a simple lesson that people recognized immediately. Abuse of power survives when nobody can prove it. It falls apart when recordings, witnesses, and preserved footage lock the truth in place. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in that aisle, would you have filmed, spoken up, or stayed quiet? Drop your answer in the comments and share this story with someone who thinks accountability never happens. And if you want more real, grounded stories, where power gets challenged and the truth holds up. Like and subscribe.